Concern among cattle farmers now that a case of New World screwworm has been detected in the U.S. The Agriculture Department confirming a calf in South Texas is infected with the parasitic fly, which can kill livestock if not treated.
The USDA calls it a devastating pest. For cattle farmers and ranchers, it's a nightmare.
We're just at the beginning of this now new phase of the battle.
As of Tuesday, the USDA reporting 6 active cases, 4 cattle and a goat in Texas and a dog in New Mexico.
The continental livestock and beef supply networks of North America are entering a period of extreme vulnerability following a sudden epidemiological disruption along the southern border of the United States. In early June of 2026, agricultural authorities confirmed the return of a highly destructive, flesh-eating parasite to American soil for the first time in 60 years. The discovery of New World screwworm larvae inside 2 young calves on a ranch in Zavala County, Texas, triggered a rapid series of emergency declarations, international trade restrictions, and widespread anxiety over the future stability of food pricing across Canada and the United States. Within 48 hours of the initial diagnostic confirmation, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency executed a total temporary suspension on the import of all live warm-blooded animals originating from Texas, effectively cutting off the primary pipeline of the continent's largest cattle-producing state. This swift and severe regulatory response by Canadian authorities highlights the deep existential threat that the New World screwworm poses to commercial ranching. Unlike standard blowflies or common maggots that feed exclusively on necrotic dead tissue, the larvae of the screwworm fly require healthy, living flesh to survive and mature. A single female fly can locate any minor abrasion, tick bite, surgical castration wound, or natural body opening on a warm-blooded animal and deposit hundreds of eggs inside it within a matter of seconds. Once these eggs hatch, the larvae utilize sharp, hooked mouthparts to bore deep into the musculature and living tissues of the host animal, feeding continuously in a characteristic corkscrew motion that gives the parasite its common name. If left completely undetected or untreated, the rapidly expanding internal wounds inevitably lead to systemic infection, extreme physical distress, and eventual death for the infected animal. While the parasite predominantly targets commercial livestock herds and native wildlife populations, it is also capable of infesting domestic pets and, in rare documented instances, human beings. The appearance of this parasite in South Texas is not a localized, spontaneous event, but rather the culmination of a multi-year biological migration northward through Central America. Over the course of 2022 and 2023, screwworm populations experienced a massive resurgence across Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and El Salvador. By late 2024, the primary biological containment barrier that had successfully confined the pest to the narrow Darien Gap region for generations completely collapsed as infestations were logged in Chiapas, Mexico. Throughout 2025, the infestation front crept steadily toward the American border, despite aggressive monitoring efforts. Although federal agencies in the United States established an extensive line of surveillance traps across the southern expanses of California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas in mid-2025, the parasite ultimately managed to bypass these defensive parameters undetected until the physical symptoms manifested in a 3-week-old calf near La Pryor, Texas. The historical context of this specific parasite explains why federal and international regulators view the situation with such profound gravity. Prior to its formal eradication in the mid-20th century, the New World screwworm caused hundreds of millions of dollars in annual losses across the American Sunbelt, decimating herds every summer as warm seasonal winds aided its geographic expansion. The eventual elimination of the pest from the United States in 1966 is widely celebrated as one of the most innovative and ambitious entomological campaigns in agricultural history. Scientists utilized the sterile insect technique, a method involving the mass cultivation of billions of male screwworm flies that were subsequently exposed to controlled doses of radiation to render them sterile. Because female screwworm flies mate only once during their brief lifespans, releasing massive numbers of sterile males into the wild ensured that the vast majority of matings yielded 0 viable eggs, causing the wild population to undergo a rapid, terminal collapse. Over a decade of intensive execution, the joint program between the United States and Mexico deployed more than 94 billion sterile flies to permanently push the parasite out of North America. The sudden return of the screwworm has forced federal and state authorities to mobilize an immediate, aggressive containment campaign reminiscent of that historical effort. the United States Department of Agriculture immediately authorized the deployment of millions of sterile flies via ground and aerial release mechanisms directly over the designated quarantine zone in Zavala County, adding to a massive regional distribution network that disperses roughly 100 million sterile insects every week across the border zones. Specialized veterinary strike teams have been embedded in South Texas to coordinate intensive inspection and surveillance operations, while the Texas Animal Health Commission has instituted strict quarantine protocols mandating that no warm-blooded livestock can leave the affected zones without undergoing rigorous individual health clearances. Furthermore, infrastructure plans are being accelerated to construct a massive new sterile fly production factory at Moore Air Base in Texas, alongside additional manufacturing facilities in southern Mexico to bolster the biological supply chain through the coming years. Despite the bold assertions of federal agricultural leadership that the pest will be successfully eradicated once again, numerous independent researchers, entomologists, and market analysts remain deeply skeptical of a rapid victory. The primary concern stems from the arrival of peak summer temperatures, which historically trigger the fastest and most aggressive reproductive cycles for the screwworm fly. State executive leadership in Texas has already publicly acknowledged that further geographical spread across the state over the summer months remains highly probable. This projected expansion represents a worst-case scenario for the broader agricultural economy, given that Texas serves as the absolute foundation of the domestic beef industry, managing a massive commercial livestock market valued at more than $15 billion. The timing of this biological crisis could not be worse for the North American food supply chain, which was already under immense structural duress. Well before the first screwworm larva was discovered in Texas, the total volume of the United States cattle herd had already contracted to its lowest absolute level in 3/4 of a century. This long-standing scarcity was exacerbated by the fact that the United States had spent the preceding year enforcing a total ban on all live cattle imports from Mexico due to the steady northward march of the exact same parasite. That prolonged border closure managed to wipe out nearly $2 billion from Mexico's livestock sector while concurrently cutting off the supply of feeder calves that American meat packers rely on to populate feedlots. Major multinational meat processing corporations, including JBS, Cargill, and Tyson, were already operating at severely reduced capacities due to the systemic lack of available livestock. As a direct consequence of this pre-existing shortage, consumer retail prices for basic products like ground beef had already climbed to unprecedented historic highs by early 2026. The biological realities of cattle ranching dictate that supply deficits cannot be resolved through rapid adjustments or increased short-term manufacturing output. Raising a single beef calf from birth to its optimal market slaughter weight is a slow, methodical process that requires anywhere from 14 to 24 months of continuous investment and care. Because there are no mechanical shortcuts to this biological timeline, any sudden loss of cattle to parasitic disease, or any regional movement restrictions that prevent calves from transitioning from South Texas breeding grounds to Midwestern feedlots creates a permanent void in the production line. The losses incurred within the Zavala County quarantine zone today represent an unavoidable gap in the retail food supply chain that will manifest as empty shelves and heightened wholesale costs many months down the road. The international ramifications of the Texas outbreak are poised to hit Canadian consumers with remarkable speed and intensity. Canada maintains a deeply symbiotic agricultural relationship with the United States, importing more than 500,000 live cattle annually, with the broader live animal trade exceeding $3 billion in value each year. While the emergency ban instituted by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is restricted strictly to live animals and does not intercept processed, packaged beef products, the impact on domestic Canadian processing infrastructure will be substantial. Canadian meat processing facilities rely heavily on a steady, predictable influx of American cattle to keep their production lines moving efficiently. By abruptly blocking access to Texas livestock, the total throughput of Canadian packing plants will inevitably decline, yielding a tighter domestic supply of beef and exerting immediate upward pressure on grocery store prices across every province. Canadian regulatory documentation explicitly clarifies that the implementation of the border shutdown was not motivated by a fear that the New World screwworm could permanently adapt to the northern climate. Government scientists openly acknowledge that the harsh, prolonged sub-zero temperatures of a typical Canadian winter would effectively prevent the tropical parasite from establishing a permanent, year-round ecological foothold in the country. Instead, the border was sealed as a matter of strict biosecurity risk management. When global and domestic supply lines are already strained to their absolute limits, Allowing even a single infected animal to bypass inspection checkpoints introduces a level of operational chaos that the industry simply cannot absorb. The ultimate economic trajectory of the North American food sector now hinges entirely on the efficacy of the sterile fly releases over the next 90 days, as regulators fight a desperate race against the summer heat to ensure that this devastating flesh-eating parasite remains an isolated South Texas problem rather than a systemic continental disaster.